Okay. What do you think, Ian? Shall we get started?
Let's do it,
Let's do it.
Eliza.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar on culture versus wellbeing. What should leaders really be prioritising? I'm Eliza. I'm the General Manager at Corporate Edge, and I am so grateful to be joined here with Ian Fagan from Skodel. He's one of the co-founders of Skodel. Welcome, Ian.
Thanks a lot, Eliza. It's great to be here.
So we'll be your hosts for today for the next hour. Before we get started, just wanted to run through just some housekeeping. Firstly, please use the Q&A box to put any questions you would like answered at the end. We will do our best to answer all the questions depending on time. If we do run out of time, we'll be sure to answer those questions in the email that goes out after the session, which will also include the recording and the slides. So let's take a look at what's on the agenda today. So today we're going to cover what is wellbeing, why is it important, how do we address it, how do we measure it, and the role of Skodel in your organisation. And then we'll go through the Q&A at the end. All right, let's get started. So what is wellbeing? Ian, what do you think wellbeing is?
It's a really good starting point. And I think before we can implement any mental health or wellbeing strategy, we need to, as an organisation, have a clear definition of what it is. For us at Skodel, we define wellbeing as a combination of how we are feeling and how we are functioning. And that doesn't mean that we need to always be feeling good about things. In fact, it's a lot more to do with how we are able to function during those emotionally challenging times. And why that definition is so important is it starts to inform the ways in which we can then measure the effectiveness of what we are doing, what types of interventions we might need, and who might need those interventions. So I think whilst there's many different ways to define it, ensuring that we start with a clear definition is really important for informing the type of work that we're going to be doing. And I hope that it is somewhat different to one of the clips that Eliza's about to show you, but I'll hand it back to Eliza now.
Thanks, Ian. So there's two facets to wellbeing. There's the physical and there's the mental. When you look at it from an individual perspective, when you have physical wellbeing, you're doing things like yoga, you've got a gym membership and you're attending gym regularly. You do things like meditation. From a mental perspective for an individual, there's things that you could do around education, on, your own mental health, anything around wellness. Things like counselling services that you could use and seeking professional help where needed. From an organisational standpoint, and looking at physical wellbeing for individuals within the organisation, the things you could do are safety first training, providing subsidised memberships that will assist the individual to take ownership of their own wellbeing. From a mental point of view, what you can do as an organisation is actually create a psychologically safe environment. You can implement EAPs for those larger organisations, and even a wellbeing program. So wellbeing in the workplace is where we can create an environment where people feel valued and supported and able to do their best work. I'd like to introduce you next to Michael from the office, who wants to share his approach to wellbeing. Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, Caitlin. So what this video highlights is, despite the activities that Michael puts in place, like meditation, his team wellbeing seems to be directly impacted by him. So what that means is things like yoga and meditation are great things to help people relax and really provide a mechanism for them to cope. But they're really feel-good measures and sometimes temporary. And I think they're not really dealing with the core issue. And the real issue here is the impact of the leader. So what's clear is the leader not only impacts the well-being, what we're seeing is it also impacts the culture. So what is culture? Culture is about how we do it here. It's the environment we create for individuals and for organisational success. So we believe at Corporate Edge that the right culture is a people-first culture. What does that mean? Well, it means that we care for our people and their well-being, and in turn they will care for us and what we're here to do, so our purpose. So what do we do? What do we need to do to care for our people and their well-being? Well, the first one would be to really create a psychologically safe environment for people to actually bring their whole self to work. Secondly, it'd be about involving them in what's happening in the organisation through the communication process, and including them as well, allowing them to provide input and be part of the journey, so they really feel connected. Now, we're seeing this through the Gen Z that's coming through. They're a great example of this. You know, you'd know in the interviews when you're interviewing Gen Z that they're looking to be connected to the why. So it's really important that they're involved. They're really connecting to the organisational purpose. So next, what we'd love to do is find out how does your organisation show that it cares for your well-being. So we're just going to go to a poll. And there's some things there you can select from. I believe you can select more than one. We might have 2 APs there. There's things like gym membership, meditation, time off, mental health leave, work-life balance, EAP. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Okay, just give you a minute. Okay. Caitlin, have we got any results?
We are having some technical difficulties. It is not letting me end the poll.
Oh, no.
But I can tell you, out of 11 responses, we've had one person that says gym membership, one person that says meditation. We've got 7 people that are saying time off, mental health leave, 9 people that are saying work-life balance, and 2 people that are saying EAPs, and 0 people that are saying nothing, which is awesome.
Yeah, well, this is really good. So it's really good to hear that organisations are actually putting things in place for to care for people's well-being. Not surprising about the mental health leave. I guess that's more of a reactive approach. It's great that people can have it, but I think what we need to do is sort of turn it around to say, what can we do to prevent that actually from happening, where they need to take mental health leave? You'd rather them actually take annual leave where they actually can enjoy the leave. So let's unpack this a little bit more. Thanks, Caitlin. So how do we know we're doing it right? So we do this by looking at our organization's climate. The climate is really just a gauge of how does it feel right now. In pre-COVID days, we could do that really easily. You walk the floor and you'd be able to get an understanding of what's really going on. You could tell by the conversations you're having, the energy levels in the room, if people are happy or if they're stressed. You also, where people are not talking, you can gauge by their physiology. So is their head down? Are they plugged in? They're all great indicators of climate. So now, fast forward post-COVID, what we're seeing is it's a little bit challenging to be able to get a gauge of what people are feeling. For some organizations, it's really difficult when there's nothing in place to be able to measure that, particularly we've got a lot of people working from home. So how do leaders gauge how people are feeling right now? We're going to talk through some ways of doing this a little shortly. But I wanted to understand from Ian what he thinks, why this really all matters.
So I think as board members and leadership, we have a responsibility to create a workplace where the dynamics are not causing or exacerbating the mental health or mental illnesses in our teams. And that's obviously important because A, we care about our teams, B, they are directly correlated with the performance. So if we are not feeling good at work and there are dynamics that are impacting us negatively, we aren't going to be able to perform as well. And more recently, the legislative pressures that we now face as leaders around monitoring psychosocial hazards and ensuring that the dynamics are not creating any of these psychosocial hazards. So what we've seen, Caitlin, if you go to the next slide, is that there has been a 46% increase in mental health claims, and 80% of employees want to see more being done. And there are some very big macro trends that indicate this isn't slowing down anytime soon. So there's both a human and a legislative angle to this that give rise to the importance of this aspect in our people strategy now.
Yeah, and all the more reason now to really hone in on what are the things that need to change. So we spoke about culture and the impact of a leader in culture and the impact on wellbeing. So we need to now understand what's the role the leader needs to play in wellbeing. Going back to the video that we shared earlier about Michael, it's clear that Michael, as a leader, really plays an influential role in the wellbeing of his team. And surprisingly, or unsurprisingly for us, he was completely unaware of it, that he was actually the killer. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of leaders walking around today not understanding they're actually impacting the wellbeing of their team. So as a leader, you actually can create an environment for wellbeing by doing a number of things. The first one is it's the conversations you have with your team and getting to know them. It could be through walking the floor, which we spoke about earlier when we're gauging the climate. It could be through your one-on-ones. So having regular one-on-ones, we have monthly one-on-ones. It's all dependent on your organisation and your capacity, but being able to speak to your team members and really getting to understand them and what's going on for them will help to understand how you can get the best out of them in their role through the coaching and mentoring. The other way also is through frequent team meetings, which gives you the opportunity to involve team members and keep them informed of what's going on. The other things that a leader can do is create a causal-based culture. So there's a really strong why as to why you exist, and really allowing giving it meaning for people who are working within the organisation. The third thing is actually having clearly defined organisational values that actually set the behavioural expectations on how we treat other people and care for each other. One of the things we've done at Corporate Edge is we have a no swear policy. It's just something we've done, I think, from the moment I've been there, and it's just a way of keeping people safe because not everyone's exposed to that. And the fourth thing is clearly defining the leadership expectations, so leaders know it's actually they play a key role in the well-being of their team. So when a leader does all this, what you'll start to see with your team is the following. Firstly, that people are feeling psychologically safe. They feel safe to learn. They feel safe to contribute. They feel useful and they feel needed. They feel safe to challenge the status quo where things are not right. They can actually speak up and say, look, I don't agree with this. I think it's a really important piece. The other things that you'll see is they're feeling included and they're feeling involved in what's going on. And that's really important, particularly for the generation coming through, which we mentioned before. So we know from our experience, the best initiatives are leader-led. So what we've learned is that leader-led culture drives the behaviours and creates the environment for well-being, and that well-being is definitely an outcome of culture. Just want to talk a little bit about us at Corporate Edge. So at Corporate Edge, we actually pride ourselves on our culture and how we care for our team. When COVID hit, it was challenging, but we quickly pivoted, particularly moving in our communication strategy where we couldn't walk the floor. What we put in place, well, I put in place for my team, and at the time we had 10 people, and put in place 15-minute check-ins every morning. And in that time, we check to see how people are feeling and what they've got on for the day, to really get a good sense of the climate at that point in time. But the challenge was throughout the day, people were facing challenges or stressful situations and needed support there. Now they reached out, but it's those people that reached out that I could calibrate what was going on. But those that didn't, it was hard to really gauge. So what was clear was we didn't have a way to capture this and track any particular trends. What was also clear is that despite how strong our culture was, we didn't have an avenue for the team to check in, particularly outside the team rhythms, and also had the resources to be able to help them take ownership for their own emotions. So some of the questions we asked ourselves during this time is, how do we know we're doing this well? How do we know if things are improving? How do we give our team a voice and feel that they're heard? How can the insights help us pivot to where we need to be? So what was clear to us is the measurement was really important. Important piece for our culture and for the well-being of our team. So now we'd love to hear from you to see how does your organisation measure well-being? Thanks, Caitlin. So some of the points we've got there are doing an engagement survey, pulse checks, culture survey, EAP is also a measure. Not working?
No, it's not working.
Oh, no.
I'm so sorry.
We might have
So yeah, maybe if
glitches
you
of
just wanted
technology.
to
make them up, Caitlin. Give us,
so
No, we're not going to do
our
that again.
options were how does your organization measure well-being? We've got an engagement survey, pulse check, culture survey, EAP, or they don't measure it at all. So feel free, guys, if you want to choose the chat as well to just give us your answers or the Q&A box, and yeah, we'll, if you guys wanted to talk about each of them.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Yeah, so we've got one person saying pulse check. Did you guys want to talk about, you know, the significance of each of them?
Definitely. I can talk to some of the points, and maybe Ian, you might come in with the EAP. But one thing that organisations do in our experience is do regular engagement surveys or even culture surveys. And they're really great measures to actually be able to get a gauge of how people are feeling about the environment. But one thing it doesn't do, it doesn't give you the monthly check. So if you do a measure at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, or the end of the year, you can get those measures then. But what happens in between? So it's really, there's a gap there in terms of understanding what's going on. So I think we've got someone mentioned pulse checks. Pulse checks are great too, which is really good that you're doing that, because that's definitely a way of measuring how people are feeling. And obviously the frequency of it will also give you a better picture of what's going on. Ian,
so Eliza, sorry, we do just have Sue. She just said that pulse checks don't really get a good response for them, and they haven't checked for years.
Well, that's good to know. I think in our experience, I think the ones that we've been doing, the response rate does vary. So it's sort of good to hear that, you know, you're also experiencing the same thing. It really is dependent on people's engagement in the organisation, and, you know, whether they're willing to share how they're feeling about things.
Yeah, and if I can jump in there as well, I think working with the teams to understand the ways in which they'd like to use it is really important. So there's obviously making sure it's anonymous might be something that's really important for them. The communication of it throughout the organisation, so when the check-ins do get pushed out, and the frequency of it. So I think that, you know, being strategic in the approach is really, really important. We know that if you're coming up to a stressful time of the year and the check is around how you're feeling about reporting season or something that's relevant to them, it's more likely to land or hit the mark for them in terms of wanting to provide feedback. So I think being strategic in the approach rather than having it as a monotonous weekly check-in or something like that is really important, because that's where we see engagement drop off. The other thing that you can do as well is provide that as a place where they can have an always-on outlet, and they can initiate it on their own accord. So they can go in and check in to just basically have a safe avenue to share how they're going, how they're feeling about things, and what are the factors that are influencing those feelings, so that it's not pushed onto them, but it's rather they're able to communicate that when it's important for them.
Thanks, Ian.
So we've just got one more response saying that this person does EAP and pulse checks, but they have low engagement with responding as well.
Yeah, I think it goes to your point, Ian, with the pulse checks where there's low engagement. You really hit the nail on the head there. It's one way. It's sort of you're sending out a pulse check. What you're wanting is people to actually take the initiative and actually own it and actually provide the feedback. So there's power in that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's about we see it as light touch and really high impact. So it's, as I said, it's not necessarily doing this every week or even every month, but it's really finding those key moments in the year where you should be checking in with the team, and then giving yourself that time to respond and acknowledge either at the individual level or develop an action plan around the key trends that you've picked up in that particular check-in, so that people feel like they're not just putting their voice into a black hole that doesn't get responded to, but there's actually going to be meaningful change off the back of that.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. All right. I think we'll just, I think it takes us to, we were very fortunate to hear about the wonderful things Skodel were doing back in 2021, and where they were doing some key work in the education space, because that's where Skodel started. And I'm sure, Ian, you'll go into that. And we're fortunate to actually have the opportunity to collaborate with Skodel to co-create a wellbeing version of Skodel. So really proud of the work we've done with the team at Skodel. And I'll hand you over to Ian to talk more about that.
Thanks, Eliza. So for those of you that don't know, Skodel is a preventative mental health platform. Our focus is on providing organisations and helping them design safe avenues for people to actually speak up and share how they're going, but more importantly as well, get linked then to different support mechanisms. So what that allows organisations to do is demonstrate and track the effectiveness of the initiatives that they have in place for mental health and wellbeing, but also be able to collect that important data with the assurity that there's going to be a response in place that's documented, that's safe and appropriate for the organisation. So we started Skodel together, Jules and myself, and one of the things that was really, I guess, unique about being a twin is that you were born with someone that you felt comfortable sharing different things with, you know, how things are going, whether it's good, bad, or anything in between. And that process was really valuable for me in my own mental health journey. And if you go to the next slide, Caitlin, I think what we're seeing when we look at the macro trends is that for the younger generation, it's becoming increasingly hard for them to speak up in organizations. And so there's very few now that would actually share if they're going through a mental health challenge or the workplace dynamics are impacting their mental health. So what that does then is it obviously creates reputation and liability risks, because we as leaders aren't aware of these dynamics that are impacting a person's mental health. So it's very hard for us then to do anything about it. And it also drives this phenomena that we've now been seeing, which is quiet quitting. And that is that there are people that are really dissatisfied with the dynamics and it's impacting them, but they're not speaking up. So instead, they stay there because of cost of living, all these challenges. It's a safe job, but they're not putting their best foot forward. So that's a real cost then to us as a business in terms of productivity and also culture side of things. So we exist to help address this challenge for organizations and do it in a safe way. And here's an example of how we can go about doing that. So we spoke about engagement rates in check-ins. I think there's a few key aspects we need to unpack. First is just being able to provide a personable experience for people that makes people feel like this is something that they would engage with, and it's not a managerial tick the box exercise to say that we're doing it. There has to be a genuine and authentic approach to it. The other is around the logistics of it, communicating that it's going out, the check-in's going out, the purpose behind the check-in. So, for example, it's entering reporting season and we know that it's potentially a really challenging time for people. We just want to get a gauge of how you're feeling, if there's any areas we can support in. And then there's also, what are the actual communication channels you use? So in this case, we've got Microsoft Teams here. We work through the feeling side. How are people feeling? In this question here, then it's how are you functioning? Because we could be feeling worried, that's natural, or burnt out, other things like that, but we're still functioning okay. And so maybe this is an indicator that it's not as much of a risk for us, but potentially down the line, it's something to be aware of. But if they're not functioning very well at all, then obviously that might trigger our support mechanisms in place to go, okay, maybe this person needs some individualized follow-up here, or given pathways to support. And then we want to understand what are the dynamics that are going on that are actually driving these, these feelings. And this is aligned now to the WHS legislation around the psychosocial hazards. So if someone's not feeling great about things and they're not functioning well, that then is aligned to those 14 psychosocial hazards that we're monitoring. And if one of those is then selected, we have different support mechanisms and pathways to support in place that are appropriate based on what's happening for that particular individual. And these are the avenues to support that we provide. So post check-in, individuals are always given that level of support, even where direct intervention as leaders is not possible. They're always given some course of action that they can take to help manage whether it's a wellbeing challenge, or if things are going well, staying proactive in ensuring that they're taking steps to improve their wellbeing. From a reporting standpoint, one of the things that we hear a lot of anecdotally is that people are feeling burnt out. But to actually get a gauge of that, how are we measuring, what extent this is impacting our workforce? And also, if we introduce mental health leave or other policies to aim to address this area, what sort of impact is that having? So we have visualizations that allow you to filter for that specific area. So if it's burnout, for example, how many people are flagging that they're feeling burnt out, and what level of impact is that having on their ability to function, so we can categorize or assess the level of risks there. And then we can track that over time here. So if we did quarterly or biannual check-ins, we can start to see whether that trend's coming down post introduction of mental health leave policies or other things like that are aimed at addressing that. And then the last thing that I wanted to show you is just the response and audit and case management side of things. So one of the things that we distinguish ourselves on here at Skodel is that we partner with experts in the field. So if that's organisational psychologists, if it's work health safety, compliance people, physical health clinicians, other people like that, we fill the gaps there within the organisation so that you can be assured that things are being managed appropriately. So in this case, if something does pop up that there's a psychosocial hazard, we have an auditable view of this and what are the actions that were taken as an organisation to address that particular concern here. So this is this response, audit and case management piece, and there's varying levels of human support that can then be provided to organisations based on their existing setup here. But the aim is that when things pop up, leaders can feel that sense of security that things are being managed appropriately and safely. And I wanted to introduce the three-tiered approach that underpins a lot of the work that we do at Skodel. And the first two tiers you can see are highlighted here because I think this is an area where more and more organisations are moving towards. A lot of work has been done at tier 3, where people are in that acute crisis mode. They have a significant mental health challenge. But we believe that the more work done at tiers 1 and 2, the better the outcomes will be for our people and for our organisation. So what do these tiers look like? The first tier is whole organisation wellbeing. And that's acknowledging that everyone has a level of well-being and they can be taking steps to improve and manage their own well-being here. Some of the challenges, as we spoke about, are around engagement. And we feel that having leader-led initiatives impacts that a lot. We think that there can be improved buy-in across that, clear purposes around why you're taking this initiative on, making it voluntary so that they feel in control of it rather than it being forced upon them. And then overall, making these initiatives personable and authentic, and sometimes less is more here. So being selective in what you introduce, whether it's a check-in or it's other aspects there. Then tier 2 is then starting to look at the signals that we have that might indicate certain hazards might be popping up here around psychological safety. So this is where the definition becomes really, really important that we spoke about at the start, because without the definition, it's hard for us then to know what sort of signals we could be looking for. And that's why we use the approach of how people are feeling, how people are functioning, because they're two very important indicators that tell us if things are starting to trend down there in terms of people aren't feeling great, whether at a group or an individual level, and they're not functioning well, then that's a lead indicator that this area might need to be looked at. What are the things that are driving people to feel that way, so that we can address it. So here the challenges are finding those signals that give us really good visibility without overwhelming us as to having too many things pop up here, but instead you're getting the really important lead indicators there. And then tier 3 is the acute crisis management. And this is this individualized care piece. And this is where EAPs and other services come into play. We have a network of partners here that work across a full spectrum of aspects of health here. And this is where organizations might look at external partnerships to address some of the gaps that might exist. But this is obviously when someone has entered into a stage now where something has been going on for them for a long time, or it's really quite intense now, and there needs to be individualized intensive care now for that person. It's also important that we maintain solid documentation of what's being done here, just from a standpoint of, obviously we need to, as an organization, then document all the steps that we're taking to manage these particular cases that might be popping up where workplace dynamics have impacted a person's mental health.
Thanks, Ian. Would love to find out what's been the feedback so far on Skodel.
So looking at it from an individual's perspective and then the leadership side, I think the overwhelming bit of feedback from an individual standpoint is that the check-ins are personable and authentic in their approach. And I know that the design is always, it can be a tricky thing to get right, but we've tinkered with that process quite a lot here so that people don't feel intimidated responding to it. It feels more like a warm hand of conversation that's been extended to people. And then from a leadership standpoint, just giving some clarity on some of the key metrics to look for here has provided some really interpretable and actionable data for them. And most of the time, vast majority, there's very, very few high-risk cases. But what you actually see is some of those people that are selecting that they're feeling okay, but maybe things could be better, start to illuminate some important trends there around role meaning and clarity and other things that at the time maybe not so significant, but they can be really big drivers of quiet quitting and potentially more concerning challenges down the line. So being able to pick up on some of those early trends from a preventative measure in a really clear and interpretable way and respond directly to them has been really valuable for leadership.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Ian. I think we've been using it now for the last 12 months, probably a little bit more. And what we've found, it's helped us guide us on the things that we know we're doing well. So things that we need to reinforce. So we get the really great check-ins where they say they're feeling energized and, they're part of something great. So we go, well, we know we need to continue that. But we know we get some check-ins where people are feeling okay. And there's influences around that okay. It could be external influences, which still we would respond automatically to say, look, would you like to have a conversation about it? It gives us an opportunity to say to them, you've been heard. And we want to be able to help you. Even if it's something we can't control, at least we're there for them to be able to guide them or coach them through that. We even had, we've had check-ins where people have said they're okay. And what we've identified through the process is the person just wasn't enjoying the role. So it's a really great way of allowing people to take ownership for how they're feeling and provide insights for the leadership team to be able to take the action they need to take. And it's on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. It's not something where you do, every quarter. So it actually keeps your finger on the pulse from a leadership perspective. All right. So what have we learned from today? Well, what we've learned is wellbeing is definitely a state of feeling good and functioning well. Culture is leader-led, therefore wellbeing has to be leader-led, and wellbeing is the outcome of culture. The role of a leader is to create an environment of wellbeing so that people feel safe, they feel involved, and they feel included. Ian, Skodel, Pete?
And sorry, Eliza. And yeah, and I think when we look at those aspects there, Eliza, we can encompass them into three elements here, which is prevent. We want to do all the work that we can in preventing wellbeing risks or mental health risks. We want to be able to respond, and responding is going to be an important piece to the engagement side of things, because that's where engagement can drop off if people feel there's nothing that's changing off the back of this. And then being able to report. And a lot of this feeds into the WHS psychosocial legislation, because if you look at the wheel there of what needs to be done, it's identification, assessing the level of risk, control measures, and then reviewing the effectiveness. And that's all done across those 14 psychosocial hazards. So whilst there is a legislative element, I think it's really important that we design our mental health and wellbeing initiatives from that people first, what's going to be most beneficial for them, and then obviously acknowledge that there is the legislative element behind that, so that if we do that first, though, the other side of things will be taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one other thing from the Skodel perspective, it's a tailored approach for your organisation. So you can determine how many check-ins you want to put through. They can be seasonal or, project related. If you're going through things like a transformation, you can use Skodel to really check in on how people are feeling throughout the process. So it can be tailored to meet your needs. I think it's time now for some questions. So to hand that over to everyone that's listening. If you've got any questions for us to answer.
So I might just go from top to bottom. So we've got one question. What are some things that organisations can do to improve wellbeing?
Maybe I start, or do you want to? I'll just talk about it from a leadership point of view. Is creating the framework. So you've got to have the right direction from a leadership point of view as to what that looks like, and really have the leaders aligned on what their role is in creating an environment for well-being. And once you've done that, there's a level of ownership from the individuals to actually own their own well-being. So if you put a measure in place like Skodel, then it's really embedding that into the organisation for them to really immerse themselves into the platform and use it. Sorry, Ian, anything to add to that?
I think just from an operational standpoint, it's important that people have environments or avenues to speak up. We know that that's one of the primary challenges in mental health and wellbeing. So working with your teams to understand how they'd like to, or where they feel most safe in having those conversations, whether that's in group settings, anonymous outlets for them to share that. I think that's a really, really important aspect of that will dictate our future wellbeing planning and ensure that we're creating a psychologically safe environment for people.
Thanks, Ian. All right.
Okay, so the next question is, do you have any wellbeing program services for organisations?
We certainly do. I think we approach it from a wellbeing program. There's so many elements, but the first thing is really equipping leaders to be able to lead wellbeing. And that we've got some programs where there could be half-day sessions. We go through things like psychological safety, dependability, meaningful work, meaningful impact. So we've got a lot of content around that, and it can be tailored for the organisation, but really to equip the leaders to be able to lead wellbeing. The second part is we do things like in the program, some lunch and learns for individuals to dip in and dip out where they want to learn things about how to manage stress, burnout, how to improve your life balance. So just some core skills that will help individuals to really own their own well-being. And the other thing is having Skodel is critical to the success of a wellbeing program, because you're able to actually get visibility of, you know, where things are at from a wellbeing perspective. You can report on it, and it gives people the avenue to be able to you know, provide feedback and let people know how things are going.
Great. So the next question is, what can be done when individuals don't take ownership of helpful action plans?
I think a good place to start here, Steve, is looking at trying to understand the root cause. So why they may not be taking ownership of those action plans. So engage in some of that open dialogue with them and assess maybe their readiness for these changes. And one of the big aspects there, I think, is actually careful questioning around helping ensure that they themselves are coming up with their own action plan, essentially, rather than action plan being presented to them. And I don't know the background behind that, but I think that that's a really important aspect of engaging people to take ownership, because if they feel that it's being pushed on them, there can be a bit of defensiveness to it, as opposed to if they feel that they've come up with their own action plans. So a lot of that happens in the conversational side of things. Then it's where, once we understand that, it's just being able to provide the support and resources that they might have identified that would be helpful for them, and then creating some level of accountability there. So that might be encouraging them to self-monitor their own action plan, and from there we can adjust a plan, obviously, as needed.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, Ian, it's also we look at it in terms of, do they have the knowledge, do they have the skills, do they have the desire, do they actually want to be in the role? So really understanding, is this the role for them, and do they really want to make change? So there's quite a few aspects that come into play in identifying how we can move them from not taking ownership to taking ownership.
Yeah.
Couple more questions. So how does Skodel differ from other platforms out there, Ian?
Thanks, Caitlin. There's two real key areas here. First of all, when we look at collecting really important mental health data, you want to make sure that if you are going to collect the risk data here, which is important now, you have the response and support mechanisms in place. So we offer that in two ways, and that is through building in those different pathways to support based on check-in responses and where people are at with their wellbeing. That all gets documented, so there's that safety in collecting the wellbeing data. Then the other aspect is that we work with really highly regarded psychologists and experts in the field, so that we provide that human expertise into embedding it. And that might be things from engagement plans and other things like that help ensure that this initiative is introduced and maintained for the long term within the organisation, and it's really having a positive impact on the wellbeing outcomes. So it's merging the tech and human expertise to it.
Great. And one more question: how can this be integrated with the work or programs that we are already doing with you?
So I think it might
Eliza,
be,
I think it might be one for you.
So what we would do is we'd look at your existing program and look at what are the elements that are there that cover all the core elements of how leaders do lead wellbeing. So if that's in there, what we'd look at, what are the additional things you would need to upskill your leaders, and then look at what are the things we need to provide from a team point of view for them to own wellbeing. And I think, as I mentioned before, I think Skodel is an important factor where you can actually really see, you can gauge how it's working. So with leaders leading wellbeing, what job are they doing there? Are they doing a great job there? How do people feel? Skodel will be able to give you all of that information.
Great. And just one more question. We actually had this come through one of the registration forms. So how does one deal with institutionalized behaviors that discourage emotionally intelligent conversations about well-being?
That's a very good question. And I think that the place that we need to start at is acknowledging that there is an issue within the organisation, and if we can even better, if we can unpack some of the reasons behind that, so understanding why these behaviours exist, and within the organisation, and that might be things that maybe taking some of the, or shouldering some of the responsibility as a leader around, perhaps we haven't responded to feedback around mental health, other things that might have gone on. So acknowledging it is the first step there. And then it will be about providing as many safe spaces for people to actually start the feedback process. And it'll take some time, because I think that in these cases, there's often a breakdown of trust. But then once people do start engaging with them, making sure that we're responding appropriately, providing recognition for people that are speaking up, so that people start to feel that sense of inclusiveness and a culture of openness and inclusivity.
Well, that's all the questions that we have for right now. If we wanted to wrap it up.
I think so. I just wanted to say thank you so much for being part of the webinar today. Thanks, Ian, for joining me and showing us Skodel how effective it can be. Really appreciate your time as well.
Thanks so much, Eliza. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was. And thanks, Caitlin, for being behind the scenes and really making sure that this has gone really well. So I really appreciate all your work there. Over the next 24 hours, what we'll do is we'll be sharing the recording and the slides. But in the interim, if you're interested in finding out more about the programs, we've put some QR codes up there, one for Corporate Edge, one for Skodel. And if you're also interested in an exploration session to talk through what is potentially possible, feel free to contact us via email, and happy for Ian and I to meet with you and talk through, what we can do to support you in your wellbeing strategy.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.